So today we're talking about the security camera brand Eufy. A company that I have a lot of products from. Now, before you jump down below and you say, well, you got all of these sent to you. For the most part, you would be correct. And typically that might make you think that this would be a skewed review. But there's two problems with that. For one, on bad tech, we don't do that. If you guys missed last week's episode, we talked about the Anker Solix generator. And in our first episode, we went over some really bad tech products from Temu. But the second part is, I actually use all of these products. My whole home security system is Eufy. And that's not because they were sent to me, but that's because I actually went and purchased them with my own money. But with all that being said, they are definitely not without their issues. And in today's video, I want to go over my complete Eufy security setup, what I love about it, what I hate about it, and how much it might even cost you to get something similar. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button. Let's get into it. So clearly Eufy has a lot of different products, and I haven't even scratched the surface here. So the first thing I want to talk about is diversity. Because the way that security systems are set up now, you really need one brand. Most systems use their own dedicated apps. So that means if you have a doorbell camera from Amazon, you're not also going to want to have a Eufy floodlight camera or a Eufy side-facing camera. So let me talk about my setup for a second. I have one front-facing Eufy doorbell camera. I have two Eufy smart locks, one with a built-in camera as well. Two wireless solar cameras, both with slightly different purposes. And lastly, for outside, I also have a floodlight camera. Let's start with one of my favorite ones, which is my backyard solar light camera. Now this one's pretty sweet because it has an extremely bright light and a really far motion activation. And on top of that, a pretty high quality 2K camera. Because I have a long backyard and I had nowhere to put a floodlight in there unless I wanted to hire an electrician to come put it in, this wireless option was awesome because it motion activates at night and it's able to give my dog an extra light outside. And because the angle of the camera, it's pretty much flush to the house, and this means it catches every single direction basically, and almost catches even the bottom windows going into my basement that are just below it. But now let's move over to the side of my house where I have one of their floodlight cameras. Now the model I have is a fixed camera, meaning that it doesn't rotate with movement, but it still has a pretty wide angle that works perfect for my situation. But this is what I'm talking about with diversity. If you need one with a movable camera, they have those as well. They have the dome 360-degree ones that can also pan and tilt. And lastly, I want to briefly mention my smart lock camera, which is a really cool combo. I actually think these are mostly the future, and why I say mostly is because they do have some limitations, but it's almost a direct replacement for a doorbell camera. So if you don't want to have to purchase both, you get a smart lock and basically a doorbell camera all built into one unit. But if you don't want the camera, don't worry, they also have a model that is just the smart lock. And if you don't want to replace your old deadbolt, don't worry, they also have one that retrofits old deadbolts to turn them into smart locks. So it's like if you look up their cameras, you're going to go through this crazy rabbit hole of these innovative, really cool products that they have. So one main area of discussion we have to talk about with these cameras is the battery life and the power supply. Because it's great to have solar cameras, but if they can't keep up with power consumption, or if the batteries are just too small to last in minus 30 to 40 weather Celsius that we get up in Canada, then they are pretty much completely useless. But let's start with their cameras that require power supplies. Now they have a pretty wide variety of floodlight cameras. And the great part is, even in my home that was from like the 1970s, that had probably the original floodlight there, I was still able to install it in that place. Although it didn't fit perfectly in place, I'm an amateur and it still looks pretty good. And all it required was a ground, a neutral, and a hot wire. So all of that was already available. Moving on to my doorbell camera, it can either be directly wired in if you have the wiring, or you can also just use the battery. Most of their models come with built-in batteries where not all of them have the option to be wired. And yeah, the battery life is actually really impressive on these. If you live somewhere where it's extremely cold like me, you would know that's a huge worry with any camera outside that's not directly connected to a power supply. The great part is these are super easy to pop off just using like a little bobby pin, but hard enough that if somebody's coming by and they want to mess with your camera, they're not just going to be able to yank it off. It charges really quickly. I would say after I leave it for like 3 or 4 hours, it's completely charged. And even in the thick of winter, I would say it lasts upwards of 4 months. But of course, weather isn't the only factor. It's also the amount of times that the camera is actually being activated from motion. Now I have 2 solar cameras from them. The first one is that backyard one I talked about. Now that one does have a built-in solar panel. And for the most part, that solar panel is enough to keep it completely charged, except for in super cold weather. Now when we got down to close to -40 here, 2 things happened. For one, the power was draining so fast that the built-in solar panel couldn't keep up. The second is, when it gets extremely cold, we're talking about -40, which up here only happens every once in a while, maybe like 2 or 3 times a year. The whole camera actually turns off, and it does this to preserve the battery, so it goes in a bit of a safe mode. However, this only happened to me once, and it kicked back on literally like 5 hours later. But to keep up with this issue, I was able to get one of their external solar panels. And this gave it more than enough power for the most part to last all the time. So as of now, I've had this camera up for a year, and I've never had to take it down to charge it. And then there's my last one, which is my front-facing camera. This is a fixed camera and probably one of their most popular, and I'll tell you why later, but one of my favorite models. It has around a 365-day battery life, and on top of that, it has a built-in solar panel, which if you're smarter than me, you're gonna put somewhere that's not over top of your eavesdrop, where it gets absolutely no sunlight. So I've had mine up for about 8 months, and it's down to 50%, and because it's in the shade, it gets practically no solar charging. But still, 7 months, 50% charge, lasted all winter. It didn't turn off once, even in that -40 day. I'll probably have to take it off like once per year just to give it a quick charge. So out of all the camera brands I've tried, Eufy has probably the most diverse selection of solar to direct power cameras. So now we have to talk about a pretty important topic, and that is your camera's storage. I know everybody's seen those articles where it's Ring doorbell being hacked or security cameras being hacked, and that can really worry a lot of people. Now, Eufy claims to offer local storage with end-to-end encryption, meaning you're basically the only person that can view it. And there's 3 main ways that you can store footage using these cameras. The first one is probably the easiest for most of us, and that's just inserting a micro SD card up to 128 gigabytes. And the best part about this is that 128 gigabytes is going to stretch you very far. And that's because these cameras really work off instances. They're not meant to record 24/7. Now, they do have some models that allow for 24/7 recording, but I strongly suggest just using the instances. And all an instance is when somebody motion activates it, or a car, or an animal. It records for a certain period of time. And you can set this time all the way up to 120 seconds. That means when somebody walks up to your door late at night, you get 2 minutes worth of recording before it shuts off. Now the second option is Eufy's backup cloud storage. Like most cloud storage, this comes with a monthly fee. For me in Canada, this would be around $10 a month. And that allows me to have storage for up to 10 cameras in my household. I personally don't use this. A, I hate paying for subscriptions, and 2, I just don't trust cloud storage when it comes to keeping my video recordings on their servers. Now, the last way that you can keep videos recorded using Eufy cameras is with the home base. Now this is the home base right up here, and you're gonna notice I have 2 of them, and there's a reason for that I'll explain in a second. So this one right here is the home base 2 that has a lot lower storage capabilities than the newest model and none of the AI features. And this is the home base 3. And the great part about this is it has all their new AI technology built in. But the major bonus is you can actually add in a hard drive up to 5 terabytes. Now that is a lot of local storage for those of you that do want to do 24/7 recording or have footage record over itself after months and months of recording. But some of you are probably wondering, if you have the home base 3, why would you also have the 2? Now this is where there's some problems with Eufy. Now a few months ago, I got excited about some of those Eufy cameras, especially the solar ones, because I really liked the idea of them charging themselves. Now this was all well and great, but they actually required home base 3 in order to be used. And at the time, I only had the second home base. Now I think this is one of Eufy's biggest faults, and that is compatibility across newer devices. In fact, I couldn't even use those devices with my home base 2. I couldn't even use them at all without buying the home base 3, which I think is a little bit ridiculous. Maybe you could take away some of the features, but you should still let me use the product. And this is where things get more annoying. So my current doorbell camera was actually only compatible with the second home base, which means I couldn't use it with the third home base. Meaning that I had to keep my second home base with my third home base, or I would be forced to buy a brand new doorbell camera that was compatible with the third home base. So honestly, that was just something that really irked me with Eufy. You can't just make your devices unable to be used at all without having to purchase a home base 3. And then you make it so I have to keep my home base 2 or spend more money upgrading to a brand new doorbell camera. It was super annoying, and I feel like that's a major flaw right now in their catalog of devices. And I wasn't alone in this. In fact, I saw a few reviews of people mentioning it. I didn't even have to really dig for it. They were just mentioning how they couldn't use their old home base 2 devices with the new home base 3, which made the device completely useless. And then there comes the issue that happened just over a year ago. Now remember when I told you Eufy said everything is encrypted end-to-end, and it's all locally stored? Well, I'm going to spare some of the details, but there was an investigation done, and it was proven that wasn't necessarily the case. In fact, people were able to play Eufy live streams using VLC Player a whole other country away. And Eufy also admitted that small thumbnails of people's faces were kept on a separate server, and this was done just to help with the facial recognition. Now, to Eufy's credit, it seems like those issues were solved, and they've promised to be more transparent in the future. It seems they also implemented a bug bounty program, which means people can try to find these flaws and then get paid for it. That's typically a good step for companies to improve their security. So now let's go through a quick breakdown of the Eufy app. It's a really simple, clean interface that leaves all of your cameras as these really large blocks. I can easily tap on one, and this will give me complete access to the camera, where I can either watch the footage vertically, or I can flip it and get a wider view. The player will display all of the camera's main features that you can activate while you're inside the interface. Things such as being able to turn on the alarm. I love this feature because it can really scare people away if you see a sketchy person hanging outside your house. You can also activate your spotlight at any time just by clicking the light. With your solar cameras, be wary of this feature because it will kill the battery very fast. And then of course we also have hold to speak, which allows me to have a two-way conversation directly through the camera. Now each camera has its own different features in which you can customize, so not all of these options will be available for each camera. Motion detection has a bunch of levels of sensitivity you can activate. This way not everything will make your camera suddenly activate, wasting battery. It also has activity zones you can set, and this is really cool. These are areas in which your camera will activate in. Anything outside of these areas, your camera won't activate in. This can be handy if you have a neighbor that sometimes activates your camera while they're in their own yards. You can also select your live streaming quality and your recording quality. Leaving it on auto is probably your best choice for live streaming. That way, if you don't have a strong connection, it will automatically downgrade the quality. I also like right here how we can just turn off the status LED, and that's that little light you see activate when your camera starts. And this is a really cool feature for my smart lock video combo. I can connect other cameras to it and unlock the door via those cameras while I'm viewing it. So right now I'm viewing my doorbell camera, and I can click this little lock at the top, click it again. That's the kind of stuff I like. Really intertwined integration through multiple different cameras, kind of creating its own little ecosystem. Now, despite how much I love this app, there are a few things I wish. For one, I wish I could customize these blocks and put them in level of importance, or even set tabs so I can have my backyard and my front yard cameras nicely organized. Instead, it just ends up like this big blob that you have to swipe through and slowly remember which camera is where so you can quickly activate and view it. So here's a quick look at my video recording history. Here's my events tab. Here's me coming from my front yard yesterday night. Check this out. And that's where the instant ends. So now let's talk about price. Because after I showed you all of that technology and all the features that come with it, you know it's going to cost a pretty penny. And it definitely costed me a little bit, close to $1,800 for my complete setup. Now keep in mind that includes a ridiculous smart lock with camera built in, another smart lock, 2 solar cameras, smart light, and a bunch of indoor ones we didn't even go over in this video. And when we compare this to other camera sets, let's say a 4 or 8 camera set that can run around $1,000, but also include up to a 5 terabyte recording hub, there can be a pretty wide price discrepancy when we're considering what option to go. But I want to remind you, with these, they are simple to set up. For the most part, you just put a couple screws into a mount, throw it on your wall, activate it with a QR code, and you're good to go. And I remember there was a point when I first bought my house that I considered getting somebody to come in to install and do all the wiring for a complete 4-camera kit. But after using these for over a year, I am convinced solar-powered wireless cameras are the future. I don't really think for the most part we need 24/7 recording. Maybe if you're a business, I think those instances just work perfect. However, if that is out of your price range, which there's a good chance it might be, that's a lot of money to spend on security cameras. They do have some cheaper options, but just keep in mind the production quality with some of their cheaper cameras, especially the outdoor ones, don't meet the standard which I like. Now, if you're looking to get started and try out one of their sets, I think the best set they offer is this 4-camera solar charging set that comes with a Homebase 3. Although these are fixed cameras, it would make it really easy to set up 4 and pretty much get most of the blind spots depending on what your home setup looks like. And that solar charging is pretty sweet. You would almost never have to take these down. Now, I want to finish off this video by saying I think Eufy almost has it figured out. They seem to be one of the biggest players in this solar camera market, and they definitely have some of the highest quality material and builds that I've seen out of any of the ones I've tested. Now, it's clear they're not without their flaws, but which company isn't? So Eufy Cameras, definitely bad tech approved. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next week.